生きねばならない。
Hello everyone, Skippy here, and welcome to One Piece episode 973, directed by Satoshi Ito and supervised by Shigefumi Shingaki. While Satoshi Ito's board looks fairly good from what we can see, I'd be lying if I said that visually this episode looks promising. It's clear that the priority animation-wise was in the last two episodes, and that makes a lot of sense when you consider that Oden won't actually be meeting his end this episode either. But combine the ho-hum visuals with what looks like weaker than normal art from Shingaki, and I can't say that I'm all too excited to see the results. Of course, at the end of the day, I won't know till I go through it all, and I could end up being surprised by it. So will episode 973 be the perfect gateway to Oden's exit that will feel just as powerful as his eventual demise? Let's jump into the boiling pot and find out. This episode covers the remainder of chapter 971, and aside from actually showing the fight between Oden and Kaido in much greater detail, as well as a brief snippet of Toki and the children that later leads to another creative Oden dream sequence, this episode is beat for beat the original manga chapter, and it surprisingly works very well when you think it wouldn't. Sure, it is on the beefier side of a page count, so it was no doubt not going to be too restricted content-wise, but even in spite of that, it's still paced really well all things considered, and gives this moment in the flashback surrounding it proper time to breathe to really sell its emotional impact. Never really feeling like it's absolutely slogging along, which is pretty damn impressive for an episode that is mostly just Oden holding up a board in the boiling pot. The voice acting too is as solid as always, even if I wish Shinobu's VA had a bit more power in her delivery, and the music choices are all extremely fitting and only add to what each scene is trying to convey emotionally. Now this episode is one that didn't really feel like it needed much added to it in the first place, so not only am I glad that it understood that and only really expanded upon what was absolutely necessary, like action scenes, but I'm also glad that it used its time wisely and used Ito's solid direction to its advantage to bring a pretty good adaptation effort to the table, featuring some pretty cool layouts to top it all off, which absolutely carries on over to Ito's storyboard. While perhaps not as polished as some of his past boards, with it being more on par with his 963 outing, Ito's storyboarding here is still by and large the highlight of the episode in my eyes. On top of the already mentioned solid layouts and interesting compositions that are ambitious as far as movement goes, and especially for an episode that looks like this visually, there's a lot of neat ideas as far as colors go that I think really heighten a lot of the moments that this episode is trying to hone in on. Like specifically Orochi's fear as he's running away from his pursuers, and Oden's resilience but then eventual determination to attack Orochi again after he's told of the situation at hand. It's definitely nowhere near as extensive as, say, the color work that we're used to seeing from Koyama, for example, but when combined with the rest of the board, that only really falters when we get a few cramped shots here and there, and a bit of confused compositing inside the boiling pot, with it feeling a bit darker than overall probably should be. 973 ends up being a surprisingly good episode, even in spite of Shingaki's drawings not being as bad as I expected per se, but still more of the same groggy and bulbous style of his that just doesn't really do it for me. It's certainly not an episode that will have people talking for ages about it like the last two, and it's nowhere near perfect for sure, but I was still pleasantly surprised at being handed a pretty good end product when I thought it wouldn't be good whatsoever, or at least pretty good, so we're already off to a decent start with the end of this here flashback. And when next week we seem to be repeating Yasuo's death with everyone but that episode's supervisors with episode 974, I must say I'm looking forward to it fairly reasonably. While we can't see much from director Yutaka Nakashima's board and direction so far, it all looks solid. And the animation on display looks both fairly loose with what could be Deguchi's animation, and fairly robust with what's quite obviously the work of Tomita. So I think we'll be in for a polished treat above all else given what we can see, and especially so when Saito and Deguchi's corrections are fairly good looking, and when Nakashima absolutely won't let this content down. Anyways guys, that's it for now. I'm Skippy, and of course Matsuda had to find an excuse to put Zoro in the eye catch.